let's start this session, okay, with the question, first question. So first question is post-colonial theory of state, 150 words. This is question number 1 of question number 1, subpart A. This was asked in 2020, okay. So this is 10 marker. So how you can approach and what is the content and what is the structure, okay, these 3 points we have to cover. Many students, what they do with this particular question, they start writing whatever they know about post-colonial theory of state because they have crammed their notes. But you should know that this is a 10 marker question, 150 words. And we have around 6 minutes, 40 seconds to complete this answer. 6 minutes, 40 seconds. That is how we categorize, calculate our, speed so that we cover the whole paper in time. Now, what do you know about post-colonial state, post-colonial theory of state? First of all, what is post-colonial state? Why this theory was conceptualized? What are the different perspectives related to post-colonial theory of state? This is what is required before you jump into this answer. First of all, yes, when I say, because when we start this particular answer in introduction, you should show that what is post-colonial state. What is post-colonial state? Any state which is still following, having legacy of colonial powers. Third world countries, for example, India, Pakistan, these countries are regarded as post-colonial state. The theory means the post-colonial theory was conceptualized to analyze the nature of these states, right? So we have given 2 answers. One is what is post-colonial state, then why this theory was conceptualized. Now, one way which many people adopt, just listen to me clearly. They select one particular perspective on post-colonial theory of state and they start elaborating. For example, many people pick what Hamza Alawi's view was, means they start with what is post-colonial theory of state and they expand on structuralist theory, means they talk about overdeveloped state. Some people, what they do, they try some kind of comparison in this particular question. So before you start, you should know that this is a 10 marker. So this should be your structure. First of all, in introduction, what is a post-colonial state? Why this theory? Mention and name different perspectives. So what are the different perspectives? So you should mention that there is one perspective which we say modernization perspective. And what are the different scholars in modernization perspective? F.W. Riggs, Gunnar Muddle. Then you should mention there's another perspective called Marxist perspective. In that we have instrumentalist theory, then we have structuralist theory. Okay. So I would advise you that in introduction, mention, name different perspectives, don't expand on them because we don't have this kind of liberty. In a 15 marker, in a 10 marker question, we have, 150 words. So in 150 words, how much word you can give to your introduction? 20% words. 20% words, it means 20% of 150, C-set ho gaya ye. How much? 30 words. At max, you should not go beyond 30 words, although you should try to limit your introduction in 15 to 20 words. But on liberal side, you can stop at 30 words, okay? So in 30 words, what is post-colonial state, why this theory, and mention name. Perspectives, scholars, perspective, scholars, right? Then in body part, choose one perspective and elaborate on this. For example, now you can choose. Now, how many perspectives you have? Broadly, you are having 4 perspectives because when I'm saying modernization perspective, in modernization perspective, you have prismatic society, F.W. Riggs. You have Asian drama, Gunnar Middle. You can expand on that. In Marxist perspective, you have instrumentalist view and structuralist view. So choose one. For example, you have chosen structuralist view, structuralist theory. Okay. Then elaborate on structuralist theory. Elaborate on what was said by Hamza Alawi, why it is said structuralist theory. Then expand on some key factors. Okay. I'm going to expand on this content. For example, first, let's discuss the structure, then I'm going to expand on the content. Then in conclusion, you should mention some factors which have impacted post-colonial state. So if you're going by this structure, it means you are covering the demand of evaluate. Although I've told you, there are multiple approaches to this answer. Some people just start with one approach, Marxist approach. But don't you think you should reread the question? क्या question आपसे ये पूछ रहा है? Just tell us, explain, put short note on Marxist perspective of post-colonial theory of state. Is it what question is asking? Is it what question is asking? No, right? So how can you expand directly on Marxist perspective on theory of state? Although many people expand their answer like this. But you should keep in mind the keywords, post-colonial theory of state. So just put some points with respect to these three broad, agendas, right? Now, you are clear until now when I say what? State is still having legacy of colonialism, okay? You don't need to expand on, right? The third world countries, USA is not considered as a post-colonial state, although there is a colony, because we don't have liberty, this kind of liberty, because it is a 10 mark. Okay, if it is asked in 15 marker, then our approach will be different. Okay, then why to analyze the nature of post-colonial state? Okay, if someone is saying that no, just expand on structuralist perspective, then you can just look yourself. How can you say that mandatorily you have to expand on structural perspective, because there is nothing like this mentioned in question, right? So just mention these keywords. Then when it comes to answer, okay, just start in a minimum words, maximum dimensions which you want to express. Just mention it was given by Pakistani scholar Hamza Alawi. Okay, so don't look at this slide, just listen to me first, okay, so that you are clear, then you can express. Okay, first of all, mention the scholar. Whenever you're expanding this one approach, mention the scholar, then mention the key idea. When we say Hamza Alawi, so Hamza Alawi, what he said that in post-colonial state, when we say state, so state has some features which are imported in nature, means imported. For example, when it comes to Pakistan, Hamza Alawi said, although we have started these institutions which were originally started by Britishers. So these are imported institutions. So in terms of politics, we became modern. So imported political institutions, okay, imported political institutions, and this was considered modern. But when it comes to economy, don't you think economy was largely traditional, right? Traditional. So because economy was largely traditional and politics became modern because we adopted these institutions. For example, we adopted these conceptions of how legislature is going to work, what power legislature is going to have, what power judiciary is going to have, what power our public representatives, MPs and MLAs are going to have. So we have given them these rights, we have given them these powers, we have decided the kind of relation the state and people are going to have. Don't you think we have adopted this relation between state and people from whom? Britain, right? So there is a gap between the two. Political institution wise, we became modern, but economic wise, we remain traditional because we remain feudal, largely dependent on agriculture and having deep inequalities with respect to this agriculture setup. So there was this gap. And that is why he said that the state has become overdeveloped because it has become modern and it has surpassed the growth of this economy. But this kind of feature is not evident in Britain, France, Germany. Why? Because their economy and politics, they simultaneously evolved. There was a revolution, and due to revolution, they got some political institutions. And these political institutions made some economic changes, and that's why their economy also, evolved. So they were having, this symphony or synchronization between political and economic development. But when it comes to third world countries, for example, India, Pakistan, those who were colonies. So what was happening? Political institutions were modern, but our economic institutions were largely traditional. So there was a gap between the two. That is why this becomes overdeveloped. Now, since you are mentioning a structuralist approach and which is coming under Marxist perspective, so you should keep in mind that you have to use base structure model. So according to base structure model, what is the base? Economy is the base, right? And these political institutions comes under superstructure. So can we say that base remained traditional, but superstructure got developed or overdeveloped, right? Can we say it like this? So you have to mention base superstructure because this is the original thesis of Marxist tradition, right? So you should show evaluator that if you're using structuralist approach, you know that this comes under Marxist perspective. And this is, you are connecting well this to Marxist perspective. Now, you're also going to mention some key tenets. For example, what Hamza Alvi was saying. Hamza Alvi was saying in post-colonial states, this executive and this military, because he was talking in reference to Pakistan, they get prominent power and they work as oligarchs, means actual power reside in the hands of these institutions, okay? Structuralists have this opinion that it is not like state is instrument of bourgeois class, because in post-colonial states, what we found, state itself became a dominant class. How it became a dominant class? Let me tell you one example. So I'm giving you one example which you should not use in your answer, but I'm giving you this example so that you, this perspective gets stick to your mind. Okay, why you people want to become civil servants? So there may be some people who have this vision that this is my domain and I can do well in this. Okay, like I chose my domain as teaching because I think I enjoy it, and some things are changing in lives of people, some results are coming, so I should be in this. Similarly, you people have your perspective, right? But below this, there are some undercurrents. And what are their undercurrents? That people who are living in post-colonial states, they have huge attraction to civil services or some government positions. Why? Because they have seen from the childhood that agar power kisi ki hai, to wo to kiski hai? District magistrate ki, SSP ki, inki, right? Because they have seen many things came possible because this person took some decision, right? So, power is concentrated in these, executives, okay? When you go to some modern nation, when I'm saying modern nation, I'm talking in language of Hamza Alvi, okay? So, for example, if you are in Sweden, so do you think that this district magistrate and police commissioner can have, this extension to her power in order to, make big changes which are not mentioned in law? It is possible in India, okay? Although due to this social media and everything, things are changing. Like you have seen one district collector, जो उसने एक yeah Chhattisgarh DM. What happened with Chhattisgarh DM? So he got he got shuttled, I think, right? He was shuttled or suspended. But the point is, for example, what happened in Tripura. So these things are possible in post-colonial state. More chances of possibilities on post-colonial state because power is concentrated in these executives. Okay, but there are less chances because in developed nations when they use the word civil servant, it actually means civil servant. You are there to serve people. Okay, now, so what you need to do, so when you are in body part and you have chosen that structuralist approach is the one which you are going to expand, you need to mention the scholar given by Pakistani scholar Hamza Alvi. Koi mahal nahi banana. It means you need not to use extra words. Okay, since you have mentioned structuralist approach, don't just mention a structural approach was given by Hamza Alvi, who was a Pakistani scholar. No, this is not how you write this kind of answer. Okay, just be specific. Given by Pakistani scholar Hamza Alvi. His theory is applicable for states in South Asia, particularly Pakistan. Okay, crisp. Then overdeveloped state, I've explained you imported modern political structure, traditional economic structure. Then you are going to give example of base superstructure. Okay, and I would advise you that mention a schematic in which base you have mentioned economic and superstructure will just mention that overdeveloped. Okay, specific historical condition have made the states of these countries as autonomous, most powerful class. I've already told you. Okay, for example, in India, the power in these societies considered where executives and civil services. Okay, Pakistan ki baat kare to military and bureaucratic oligarchy. For in India, it is not military or bureaucratic oligarchy, but in Pakistan, yes, army is more dominant. Since you are talking about Hamza Alvi's view, then you have to mention this military bureaucratic oligarchy in Pakistan. Okay. Then in last, what you're going to mention? You're going to mention that Hamza Alvi has said that actually a state works as a bargainer. Okay, a state manages different classes. You are going to use the concept of Bonapartism here, where a state itself works as a bargainer between different parts, different classes. What are these different classes? Like indigenous feudal class means that class of Pakistan means who are big landlords. So they already have their dominance. So state has to manage their dominance. Okay, they are not dominant. Actual dominance is with the state. Officers, rulers. Rulers means who got this government. Okay, indigenous bourgeois class means original Pakistani who some corporates. There were some mills in Pakistan, right? I'm talking the time of Hamza Alvi, although Hamza Alvi just died 2003 around. Now, metropolitan bourgeois means in that bourgeois, there are some bourgeois, there are some corporates who have links to some other areas. So these, for example, in Pakistan, there may be some companies who are from other nations. So state has to manage them also. So actual power lies with state. So state is not instrument. Like in instrumentalist perspective, state is an instrument of one class. But according to Hamza Alvi, state is not instrument of one class. State manages different classes. Okay. Now, when it comes to impact, don't you think globalization has impacted post-colonial state? Right. But now the point is, you have to gain marks. Don't, generalize your conclusion. Your conclusion should be specific. How it can be specific? Globalization, don't you think globalization has modernized the economy? Right? In starting, we were saying, Hamza Alvi was saying that state is overdeveloped. Okay? We are having overdeveloped state. Why overdeveloped state? Political institutions became modern, but economy was traditional. Don't you think globalization has modernized this economy? So if this was political institution, this was economy. Since it is being modernized, don't you think it is going to change the nature of post-colonial state? Yes or no? Now, so when you are using globalization, mention that globalization has modernized economy, which was earlier traditional. Okay. Now, civil society and judicial activism. don't you think civil society and judicial activism has put some restrictions on power of state? Arbitrariness, which earlier used to have, you people used to have. Don't, you're not you people, means those who are in bureaucracy and were using their power indiscriminately, right? Now they have become more accountable. So earlier, the power which was concentrated in the hands of civil society, डीएम ने मार दिया किसी को, लाफा कोई कुछ नहीं कर सकता, डीएम साहब है, मालिक है. अब ऐसा नहीं, 1 मिनट में वीडियो बन जाएगी, देश में सर्कुलेट हो जाएगी, right? So the point is we are bringing actual rule of law in these post-colonial state, means limit on the arbitrariness of the power of state, right? So when you are mentioning civil society, and then mention this, that what is the impact? This is what I'm saying, specificity in your conclusion. Okay, that's how you conclude your answer. So we have another question. Discuss the normative and behavioral approach to the study of political science and examine the limitations of the behavioral approach. So this is from Political Science, paper 1, section 8, topic number 1, political theory, right? Approaches. UPSC have specifically mentioned the word approaches. Now, just check the directive of question. Directive of question is discuss. Means you need to elaborate. Then you have two approaches, normative approach, behavioral approach, that you need to discuss, elaborate. Now there's second part, examine the limitation of behavioral approach. Means when it comes to second approach, you need to talk about limitations also. Okay. Now tell me, what should be your approach to introduction? Introduction kaisa karna chahiye? There should be a particular scheme in your mind. Set hai, matlab pehle se, if certain kind of question is asked, then this should be your introduction. I'm talking about introduction. You all know. For example, if this question is asked, so this can be asked in 20 marks or 15 marks. Okay. I'm just talking about introduction. I'm not talking about body and conclusion. Now, broadly, you should have three points in mind. Okay. First of all, why we have approaches in political science. Why we have different approaches. Why we have this chapter, this unit. Why we read different approaches to political theory. Zarurat kya hai iski? Right? Then what is normative approach? What is behavioral approach? You just need to use 1 or 1.5 line. Not more than that. For example, when we say normative approach to political theory. So normative approach to political theory itself talks about how things should be, how our political system should work. So it works on should be, ought to be, kya hona chahiye. Don't you think normative approach is moreover philosophical in nature? Don't you think normative approach is way older than behavioral approach? Right? So we have few points in mind that when it comes to political theory, its evolution started with normative approach. When we say normative approach, it is loaded with some morals, some philosophies, right? All of you know that political science evolved from political philosophy, right? Plato is regarded as father of political philosophy. Then we have Aristotle, who is regarded as father of political science, right? So emerged from philosophy, how things should work, ought to be, kya hona chahiye. But when it comes to behavioral approach, it is considered more scientific in nature. We conduct studies, verifications, right? We talk about David Easton. So for behavioral approach, you should have just one line. How it differentiate means it is scientific in nature, right? It is more realistic than normative approach, because normative approach talks about kya hona chahiye. Behavioral approach talk about kya hai, what is, right? Then just mention in one line or half line, what is the limitation of behavioral approach? Don't you think with more stress on behavioral approach in 1960s, we found that we have lost touch with the base of political science. Means we have stressed too much on techniques that we have moved away from the core of political science. This is limitation of behavioral approach. So basic understanding on these three keywords should be reflected in your introduction. I'm repeating this again. Question directive is discuss, means analyze nahi hai, critically analyze nahi hai, right? Comment nahi hai. We have to discuss means we have to elaborate. Now, normative approach, behavioral approach, you should one and a half line, you should expand on that, and then limitation. 3 keywords in pe expand karna in introduction, they should be clear. Okay, that is why for introduction, what needs to be in it? Normative or philosophical approach was one of the traditional approaches. It was a traditional approach, just underline it. And why we use approach? Because to study, analyze, and evaluate political science. Okay. Later we evolved modern behavioral approach. What was the difference? Scientific methods in political analysis. Underline this, scientific methods in political analysis. Then limitation. I've told you 3 keywords you should expand. Limitations kya hai? Limited relevance, ignoring values. Because too much focus on techniques, not values. Like we were discussing about values and normative approach. Is pass the baton to post-behavioralism. And that is why, because there was crisis here. In 1960s, there was too much stress on techniques, and that is why we evolved. Post-behavioralism means behavioralism is not also perfect. We should go for post-behavioralism. And when we talk about post-behavioralism, we talk about mixture of values and scientific discipline, right? Now, so this is what you need to mention in introduction. Okay. Now, when it comes to body, what needs to be done? Now, whatever you have mentioned 3 points. Now your body should have 3 paras or 3 broad dimensions. What are broad dimensions? First is normative approach. Since the word is discuss, we have to discuss normative approach. Keep in mind, we are going to discuss and then we are going to supplement this with some scholars. Then we are going to discuss behavioralist approach. Then we are going to supplement it with some scholars. Then we are going to put limitation, and limitation also we are going to mention some scholars. For example, David Easton. So David Easton has changed his approach in his lifetime. So he was a key person who was pushing for behavioralism, and later he was also criticizing some aspects of behavioralism. So we are going to mention that. Okay, that is very much necessary. Now, so in body part, we can say that traditional normative approach seeks what ought to be. And keep in mind, whatever word you have used here, this should not be repeated when you say discuss. Okay. Otherwise, for evaluator, it is like a redundancy error because you have used that word philosophical approach, traditional approach, study, analyze, evaluate. But here you are going to expand on that. What ought to be? Political philosophy evolved as a part of philosophy. Plato, the father of political philosophy, I've already told you, sought idea behind the apparent to discover the ideal state. Okay. There is an interesting fact. If you look on these political theories, liberty, equality, justice, right? Just look in which part of the world they evolved. Just tell me when you have, I'm expecting that you have gone through liberty, equality, justice, rights at least once, right? Many people are saying West. No, I'm asking USA, Europe, Southeast Asia, South Asia, West Asia. In terms of contribution in political theory, Europe, right? You can take example of Rawls. You can take example of Hobbes. Where was Hobbes? Hobbes was in Britain. Take example of Rousseau. Where? Europe. Rousseau's views contributed in France. French Revolution. Look, J.S. Mill, major contributor in liberalism. Where he was living? Britain. So Hobbes, Locke, Machiavelli, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, where were they living? Europe. Right? So these part means whatever you are reading in paper 1 section A, you have read political theory approaches, then whatever you are reading, justice, equality, major contribution is from Europe. And when you read this, you can clearly see that actually this is normative approach. This is normative approach. So equality, it is also talking about what ought to be. Justice is also talking about what ought to be, how things should work. Rights is also talking about how things should work. right? So all of this was going on in Europe, right? Interesting thing is when we talk about behavioralism, so behavioralism as a movement in political science, it elaborated, or I would say evolved in USA. American Political Science Society is one major contributor. Now, so the structure in your mind is you are going to expand on one keyword, then you are going to mention some examples, liberty, equality, justice, right? These are some political theories which are originated from normative approach. Then you are going to mention scholars like Leo Strauss considered philosophy and politics identical. Underline this. Philosophy and politics identical. This is what normative approach is. Then you are going to mention Rawls, Habermas, Hannah Arendt, etc. Use this approach to build their theories, right? Now, the whole purpose is that answer writing in PSIR optional gets simplified for you people. You should have a simple structure in your mind. Whenever you are about to, whenever you are about to attempt a particular answer, things should be clear in mind. Okay, I have to do this, do this, do this. I have to, just put my knowledge in this structure. That is what I'm trying to do here. Now, when it comes to modern approach, you can simply say modern behavior approach focused on actual behavior rather than philosophical ideas. It bloomed after World Wars. Political science was in crisis as it became armchair theories. So why behavioralism came? Because it was considered that these political philosophies, actually this normative theory, these theories of political science are actually, away from reality. These are armchair theories. Some people who are in, their chair and they're just thinking, okay, how should things work? How should things work? They are diverged from contemporary realities. So this was the need why we brought behavioralist approach in political science. Now we brought some scientific approach in political science. It set out a movement of purification of techniques as a protest movement. This was said by Robert Dahl. Robert Dahl said, actually, behavioralist approach was kind of purification of the techniques, right? And why it was said protest movement, behavioralist approach? Because it was protesting against the application of normative approach. Normative approach से नहीं हो पाएगा. इस वजह से क्या चाहिए? अब चाहिए behavioralist approach, right? Actually, if you just look at the political science option syllabus, every concept is woven with another concept. So it is like a story, and concepts are embedded in these stories. Okay. So just have this chronology in your mind, some scholars in your mind, and a particular structure to your answer. Now, when we say behavioralist approach, I've told you, you have to mention David Easton. And why? Because David Easton gave 8 intellectual foundation stones or features of behavioralist approach. What he said? He said there should be regularities. Means political theory should not be abstract. It should have particular regularity. It should be verified. It should have particular technique. It should have quantification. How many people you are surveying, in which area, why. It should be value neutral. When I say value neutral, it should not be bogged down by certain preconceived notion of good or bad. What was happening in political science, what some society was considering good got loaded on political theory because they think that is good. But David Easton said there should be no bias, right? There should be a particular systemization. It should be converted into pure science, and then it can be integrated into system. Means what is the duty of political science? What is the duty of political theory? You should make a theory so that it is bringing some solution to present crisis, and you can just integrate into our statecraft. Statecraft means how things are working in terms of government functioning, right? So these are 8 approaches, 8 foundation stones, I should say. Then, so you have expanded on 2 things: normative approach, behavioralist approach. Now limitations. So what is the limitation? Mostly pointed out by traditionalists, including limited relevance of scientific approach in political science. They said political science is different from other scientific disciplines. So using scientific approaches is having own limitation. It is unnecessary, and you have complicated terms and techniques. You are conducting surveys, you are predicting behaviors. How can you predict behavior of people? Moving ahead. Scientific techniques are not universally applicable. This is one other limitation of behavioralist approach. We are talking about limitations of behavioralist approach, such as justice, rights. Now tell me. So this is a limitation of behavioralist approach. So can we conduct some particular science? Can we use some scientific experiments to come to a conclusion? Then what is justice and what are rights? No, because justice itself is a value-based conception. Something which is justice for Ayush may not be justice for Kavita or Nitish or Amit or Bindisha. If we talk about behavioralist approach, if we talk about surveys, so surveys are going to differ. Results on different techniques are going to differ. So we need certain values to solidify one particular theory, right? So that is why this was a crisis. You cannot conduct rights, justice, rights. You cannot conduct experiments and come to a conclusion with regard to these concepts. Okay. Later, behavioralism led to the crisis. The scientific approach. Okay, I don't know if you have read about Rawls. Okay, so when we were talking about justice in this Rawls, Wheel of Ignorance, then also we told this that you cannot come to one conclusion of justice by simple survey or conducting some scientific experiments. Yes, that is why Rawls adhered to post-behavioralist approach. Yes, to save the decline of political theory. And what decline we are talking about? Decline of 1960s again. Okay, now the scientific approach could not deal properly and fully in 1960s movement and conflicts. And what was this movement and conflict? For example, so what I'm talking now is not part, or you should not add this in this particular answer, but I'm expanding on this because so that you have better connection to what is going on in this decline in 1960s. For example, civil rights movement in USA. So America, USA was saying that they have built that behavioralist approach, scientific discipline, right? But do you think their political system was apt in terms of justice and rights? No. There were civil rights movement, and what these civil rights movement were saying, they were saying now is the time you have to adopt some political theories based on values. Equality is a value. But American political society was largely focusing on what? It was focusing on behavioralist approach. So this came as a challenge. Civil rights movement came as a challenge. It challenged and said that now you have to base your political theory on the base of values. And when we are saying you have to base your political theory on values, now, even if this Senate is dominated by whites, still this Senate has to make certain laws which are giving equal status to the blacks in terms of having residences, in terms of education, in terms of public transport. Right? So these were the challenges when decline was happening with respect to behavioralist approach. Okay, so these were the three things which was asked. Now comes to conclusion. Now I have told you, conclusion should be short, having elements of everything which has been discussed in body part. Most of the things which have been discussed in body part. Normative behavioralist approach were important stages in the journey of political theory building. First thing is that normative approach and behavioralist approach both had their crisis, but they were important in terms of evolution of political theory. Eastern believed behavioralist scholars sitting in ivory towers, purifying their techniques, caused the crisis, which led to further development in political science. Yes, David Easton credo of relevance. So David Easton said that because we evolved to behavioralist approach, but still it was like sitting in ivory towers and you are, purifying on techniques, you're talking about, how things should work and how things are working and what is happening, since you are not basing your things on value. No, credo of relevance is missing. That is why we had this crisis. And that is why we had another approach, which was post-behavioralist approach. So in conclusion, you can just conclude like this, that both these approaches were important stages in journey of political thought. This line is most important. Then mention Eastern, complete. If you're clear until now, then mention YAY in comments. Then I'm going to come to a very interesting question, जिसमें कि आप लोग कमाल कर ही देंगे, मुझे पूरा भरोसा है. You're going to instantly grab what is the demand of question. Okay, इतना भरोसा है मुझे. This is the kind of trust I am having. Let's come to this question. Question is, examine the comparative advantage of democracy and autocracy in restraining violence. Do you think that autocratic societies are more prone to political violence? So although when it comes to paper 1 section 8 democracy, most of the people they cram what are the different theories of democracy: representative democracy, type of democracy, representative democracy, and deliberative democracy, and classical theory of democracy. That is what generally people approach. And yes, that is needed. We should have apt understanding of all these subtopics which are mentioned there. But let's attempt this question. First of all, examine the comparative advantage. Question is examine. Directive word is examine. In previous question, directive word was discussed. When the directive word is discussed, we need to expand on keywords. I'm repeating it again. If someone should put it down on the paper. When we have discussed as directive word in the question, we expand on the keywords of question. When the word is examine, we need to compare. We need to check pro and cons, positive, negative. Application. The comparative advantage of democracy and autocracy in restraining violence. And this question is itself using the word comparative advantage. Do you think that autocratic societies are more prone to political violence? Now my question is, consider that you are sitting in mains and this question is in front of you. So as of now, all of you know how should you introduce. In introduce, you should pick the keywords. Keyword is democracy, autocracy, and political violence. So in total, we have 3 keywords, right? In introduction, if this question is asked in say 20 marks, okay, or 15 marks. So it means you are having say 20 to 200 words, okay, 200 to 220 words. It means you can use around 40 words in your introduction, okay. So in 40 words, you should expand on democracy. You should expand on autocracy. What is autocracy? What is democracy? And you should expand on political violence, okay. So now my question is, this is about introduction. What comes to your mind when you heard this word political violence? What is political violence? What do you know about political violence? Whatever comes to your mind, just pour it out in comments. The sole purpose is knowing you people, where you get stuck, where you need more push, misuse of power, breach of power, West Bengal scenario, clash of ideologies of power capture, power crisis between 2 political factions in Bengal, suppressing political rights like freedom of speech, misuse of money, muscle power for political gains, violence against protesters, against government, dictatorship. Okay, chaliye. So why I have put up this question? So this particular question was asked by UPSC. Okay, it has been asked, and it is my understanding of students that generally students, whenever they read this word political science, and they will think that this has something to do wrongdoings of state against people. Tell me how many of people think like this? Means when this question is using the word political violence and the word is autocratic societies. So it means political violence means some wrongdoings, some force which is used by state against people. This assertion is at least correct. How you people are going to, approach this question. Like we have unity as essential feature of Indian state. Similarly, you people are also wrong in united manner. Means all those who have mentioned yes are wrong. Okay. Although, reading this statement, autocratic societies are more prone to political violence, it seems logical, but it is incorrect. Why it is incorrect? Let me give you a brief idea about political violence. Okay. First of all, whenever I use political violence, it means violence which is done to attain some political objective. This is called political violence. Okay. Violence which is done to attain political objective is called political violence. Okay. It can be done by government. It can be done by people. It can be done by non-state actors against state. It can be done by state against non-state actors. I'm repeating again. One kind of political violence can be state doing violence against people. That is just one aspect. It is not all. State is doing violence against its own people so that suppress their rights, so that suppress their views. Because state wants to consolidate their power. So whoever are dissenting, let's suppress them. This is just one political violence. Another political violence can be people taking up arms against state. This is also political violence. For example, left-wing extremism. What Naxalists are doing, this is also political violence. People doing violence against state, right? Then state are having political violence against another state. This is also political violence. It means India and Pakistan, India and China having war. This is also political violence because we are using violence to attain some political objective. Some terrorist group, Jaish-e-Mohammed, non-state actor, it is acting against state. This is also political violence. Some non-state actor acting not against state, just some groups, some religious groups, some people from particular religion. This is also political violence. It means political violence can be possible from the side of state also, from the side of common people also, from the side of non-state actors also. And political violence can be used within the territory also and outside the territory also. This is the application of political violence in this particular question. If some of you are limiting your understanding of political violence just with the action of state, then you are not going to touch the dimensions of autocratic societies acting against other states and comparison with democracies. Now, I've told you this is a technique which you should learn, that whenever you need to write an introduction, pick the keywords and you have to write something about them in introduction. For example, democracy is political system where majority rules. Autocracy is a political system when one person governs. Political violence is a violence used to achieve political goals. 3 keywords, expansion. Now, what is the other demand? Demand is, do you think autocratic societies are more prone to political violence? When it is saying autocratic societies are more prone, more means comparison. Comparison with whom? Democracy, na? Use one line. One line means democracy and autocracies have variable relations with political violence. There is variation. Let's understand each factor one step at a time. It is quite simple. First of all, when I say political violence, I've already explained to you. It is a broad term used to describe violence, hostile or aggressive acts perpetrated by either persons or government to achieve political objectives affecting desired change in the government or society. I have mentioned or society. Okay. Many governments use violence to intimidate the population, defend against external and internal threats, to coerce other governments, conquer territory. This is one political violence which is used by government, but the word political violence is broad. How it is broad? Because these are the types of political violence. Violence between non-state actors, any ethnic and regional conflicts. This is also political violence. One-sided violence by non-state actors. For example, terrorism. Terrorists committing violence against a particular group, particular religious group. That is also political violence. Guerrilla warfare, insurgency, extremism. One-sided violence by state. For example, state is using violence against a particular section. For example, Hitler used this violence, genocide, against whom? Jews, na? Ethnic cleansing. This is what he used. Torture, capital punishment, political brutality, induced famine, curfew. These are all techniques of political violence. Induced famine, जान पूछ के लोगों को भूखा रखना, to create difficulties for some section of people, so that if we are creating difficulties, now we are going to enter as a benevolent benevolent power ki we are taking care of yourself, and that is how you are controlling them. So this is also kind of political violence. Violence between state and non-state actors, for example, rebellion, rioting, revolution, civil war, counterinsurgency. This is also political violence. Violence between states, for example, direct and proxy wars. Proxy wars like Indian Raw and ISI of Pakistan having proxy wars in different areas, like Balochistan being one, right? Direct war, you already know direct war when we both have declared war, right? So these are all political violence. Now, since you have understood the type of political violence, then now you should think that if we are having a democracy and if we are having an autocracy, so the kind of political violence, would we be having some changes? Yes, we are definitely going to have some changes. Why? Now, point is democracy's advantage. Since you have gone through this, and now we have to compare democracy's advantage regarding political violence. What is democratic regimes? By allowing, just think, don't just read, just yourself you should relate. Since we are having democracy, so don't you think democracy have more political competition? We have more political competition. It means if one government, party of one government, if government of one party is using force against people, then what is going to happen in next election? Next election, there is great chance that this party is going to get defeated. So since we have political competition, participation, it diffuse political violence. So every political party, limit itself that we cannot use indiscriminately. We cannot use power indiscriminately because we cannot use political violence. Otherwise, these people are not going to vote us again in next election. So this is available in democracy. Do you have this facility in autocracy? One person rule? No. For example, in China, what China did in Tiananmen Square. So these protesters were having protests from good amount of time. So although Chinese government was giving them leverage, okay, chale jao, ghar chale jao, karo aur chale jao, but they were not going. So what China did? China was indiscriminately used power on Tiananmen Square. Many people were, dead. This can happen in China, but can this happen in India? No, this cannot happen in India. If people are protesting and this kind of incident happen in India, then there will be civil unrest in India because we are a democracy. Our people have different kind of, consciousness or relation with government. Okay. Yes, for example, with farmer protest, in spite of having this, farmers protest going on from, so much time, for example, with CA and other protests, we cannot use political violence. Although there are some tools to manage these things, which we can discuss in some other lectures, by which government, without using political violence directly, have some ways to diffuse these protests. Okay, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. Many of you will relate to it. Now the point is, democratic institutions provide peaceful channels for resolving political conflict. Okay, because democratic, for example, let me give an example why I'm saying this. You should not just read it. When you are mentioning this, you can also give example. Consider a setup which is having autocracy. There's one person rule. Okay. Yes, you can use democratic peace theory, Doyle. Now the point is one person rule, and we have diversity. So what may happen that particular group of people who are living in a particular region have some issues with other group of people. Okay. So in autocracy, they don't have particular channel in which they can communicate and diffuse this tension. But we have this channel in democracy. We have representatives from all over the India. So, for example, in Parliament, member of Parliament is responsible to voice the concern of its people. So, if that person is voicing concern, then solution can be brought up in that discussion. So, democratic institution, Parliament is a democratic institution. So, it is a peaceful channel for resolving political conflict, right? Similarly, democratic government legally constrained response to political violence is often seen as more legitimate. For example, if autocratic society, if autocratic government is using some political violence, so this have less legitimacy. Means if Kim Jong-un is, showering some water cannons over some protesters, then it is possible, then this media of, other countries is going to escalate the matter further, because legitimacy is less. Using of political violence also has some kind of legitimacy, but Kim Jong-un won't be having that kind of legitimacy. China won't be having that kind of legitimacy. But Indian government doing this may have certain legitimacy because it is chosen by people, right? It is thought that since it is a democracy, then this government is going to use its power judicially, because if it is used in a discriminate manner, then this government also knows that next time we are not getting elected. So that's why it is said that political violence is often seen as more legitimate in democratic government. This is important point. Don't miss this point. Democratic socio-economic development fosters peaceful interactions. For example, when we say democracy, so since government is chosen by people, then government has to ensure that there is socio-economic development. And if there is socio-economic development, don't you think there's less chance of political violence among people? There will be peaceful interaction. All of you know, if we have huge poverty in particular area, then we have more chances of political violence. Because whenever there's poverty, this is kind of injustice. And when there is injustice, there is what? Instability. So people are going to unite, some people are going to take arms, some people are going to engage in criminalization, then these people can, join together and, do political violence. So in democracy, there are less chances because socio-economic development is one prime focus. Okay, government has to ensure this. Yes, that is why, Praveen, in Naxalist areas, if you look at the kind of expenditure or the allotment of resources which is done to, this left-wing extremist states, means states who are suffering from left-wing extremism, you will find that there's a huge difference in the positive context. For example, if a particular road is being built in UP, Western UP, and it is having a tender of say 10 crore rupees, then it is possible that if same kind of road is being built in say Bastar area, then allotment would be around 30 crore. Why? Because a huge part of expenditure is gone to, threats or possible security measures which are needed, expenditure on that. So, and more allotment is done in terms of infrastructure and health, although whatever government tries, now these groups, they try to, work as a bottleneck, to stop this, because agar development ho gaya, so how they're going to connect with the consciousness of these people. अभी तक तो कहते हैं ना कि गवर्नमेंट ने किया क्या है, इस वजह से हथियार उठा लो, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट ने कर दिया, तो how you are going to convince the people? So although there's a lapse on the both sides, means when I'm going to talk about this in security issues of India, then I'll elaborate on this more. What are the ground realities? What are the major reports? But let's focus on political violence. Democracy is disadvantage. Let's focus on disadvantage. One disadvantage is that political violence वहां पर होगी जहां पर opportunities होंगी. Means political violence is going to happen where we have opportunities to organize. In democracy, you can organize, you can form association, you can put forth your views, and this is the starting point of a group doing political violence in future. So if we are having democracy, it means we have these rights to people that you can voice your concern, then you can, make groupings. So if you have democracy plus your institutions are ineffective, means it is duty of government to provide basic infrastructure to these people, but government is not able to provide that. Then what is going to happen? You have democracy, so these people are, collating themselves. These people are, uniting themselves and building a consciousness to fight against government. And your failures, institutional failures, are going to supplement them. So it will provide them motivation to use political violence. Okay. For example, someone was using this Naxalism. Yes, similarly, these separatist group in Northeast. So what they do? They're using democracy, still starting with they, unite together. Then they find, since they unite together, then they tell people that, look, what state is doing for you. They're not they're not building you employment opportunities here. What has happened in the past 60, 70 years? They're not doing this for you because their focus is on mainland India. They differentiate between this thing. Okay. So they try to, attempt on the concept of India. And how they get this motivation? Because ineffective institutions are there. Okay. And that is why political violence, emerge. But when it comes to autocracy, in autocracy, people don't have these opportunities to organize themselves. If Praveen and Harsh are organizing, Praveen, Dikshant and Harsh are organizing themselves in autocracy under Kim Jong-un. So if Kim Jong-un is having slightest, hint that these people are organizing themselves, then what is going to happen with these people? Gayab ho jayenge. Okay, they are going to be vanished. The records are going to be vanished. There was no people like them ever exist in North Korea. Okay. But this is not possible in democracy, because in democracy, people voice their concern. Process of democratization is often violent. This is also important. If you look of the transition of Britain from monarchy to monarchy having democracy, this went through glorious revolution, right? If you look at the transition of France, it went through French Revolution. That was violence. That was violent. If you look at the democratization of India, it also went through freedom struggle against colonization. So all of this was what? Political violence used for democratization. So process of democratization is often violent. Democracies can be vulnerable to transnational terrorism. It is said that like 9/11 attack in USA, terrorism in India. Now, when we compare to autocracy, it is said that autocracy are less vulnerable to transnational terrorism because autocratic government is not that much accountable to the people. So autocratic government can channelize huge amount of resource to fight against anyone who is, who is taking stand against that particular state. Okay. So this is one point. Democracies that are victim of political violence may curtail certain freedoms in order to increase security. Just listen to me. The point is, if we look at a particular democracy, if that democracy is having some political violence going on, means some people, some groups are on, on streets. Now these people who are on streets, they are representing voice of people and they are creating some chaos. So what this democratic government is going to do, many times what they do, they put a surveillance state, they increase security, they curb their freedom. So what is going to happen if you curb the freedom of people who are already against state? Such actions may erode democracy and contribute to greater political violence due to suppression of opposition. Because in democracy, if you suppress people, then this suppression is never a solution, right? So autocracy and political violence, democracy, although I've explained you in comparative manner, now let's have some understanding on autocracy and political violence dynamics. It is said that if you have autocracy, then there is less chance of having political violence Because if there is chance of political violence, state immediately can use political violence, right? And in short run, you can suppress this, but what is going to happen? It is going to increase the discontent, and in the long run, it is going to hamper you. For example, in Syria, what Bashar al-Assad was doing, Baath party of Bashar al-Assad says that we have democracy. And why they say they have democracy? Because they conduct elections. But Western powers say that whatever Bashar al-Assad is saying is not democracy. Can anyone tell me why Western powers say that in Syria there is no democracy in spite of Bashar al-Assad saying that they conduct election and Baath party get majority? What is the reason? Praveen said this, clear. The point is, my question is democracy. So Praveen said there is no free and fair election. Free and fair election is basic tenet of democracy. So in Syria, what is happening? Baath party is there, and other parties can also, fight election, and they also fight election, but they never win. Why? Because Baath party has has huge impact on state machinery. Means that government teachers have this duty. Every government servant has their duty that you have to participate in convocation, in conventions of Baath party. You have to participate in them. The government teachers have this duty that you have to convince these parents of students about the good things, what is happening with this, Baath party doing and Assad doing. So they build consciousness of the people. They force people to accept that Baath party is the only solution. So they are using government machinery to gather consent of the people towards the government. So can we say this is a democracy? No. No matter how many elections you conduct, but these are not free and fair, right? So that is why I've mentioned Syria into autocracy. So autocratic repression may be effective. So in short run, what Bashar al-Assad was doing and his father was doing, they used political violence and they curbed the voice of the people, but it was not effective for the long term, right? Last question of the day, Gramsci's concept of hegemony short note. So considering this, I'm just showing you an answer, okay, a structure, and I'm going to pinpoint on one habit which you should include when you have to expand on various dimensions and you have, word limit is less. For example, this question can be asked in 10 mark, 150 words, okay? So when we talk about Gramsci's concept of hegemony, I expect that all of you have read about Gramsci in paper 1, section A, Western Political Thinker, and you have read the differentiating factor of Gramsci from orthodox Marxism. That's why Gramsci is considered as neo-Marxist. Means what were Marxist views? Gramsci had some different opinion on certain positions of Marx, right? For example, what Marx was saying about base and superstructure, Gramsci expanded on that. Gramsci said this capitalist power are having hegemony not just due to economy. This is due to cultural hegemony. And how they build their cultural hegemony? By controlling superstructures. So Gramsci divided society into political society and civil society, right? And then Gramsci said that these superstructures, media, family, education, all of them are told certain points and expanded them as truths, propagated them as truths. Since moreover people believe them as truth, so this notion of capitalism is considered as only way of life. That is why there was a differentiation in which Gramsci said that you have to fight war of position before your final violence, by which Marx said that there will be a spontaneous revolution in which there will be violence and we are going to finish capitalist, and then we are going to establish socialism, and then from socialism there is going to be a final transition to the ultimate state, which is communism. Okay. Now, my point is, whenever you have to mention that multiple dimensions, so what you can use you can use this kind of schematic. Okay, capitalist society, base, superstructure. In superstructure, there's religion, moral, social practices, right? Then structure of domination, then civil society and political society. So how by civil society they dominate family, school, church, structure of legitimation. Then political society, government institution, these are structure of coercion. Okay, so first civil society is used and political society is used for as a last resort, right? So if question is asked in 10 marks, so your answer should be until 1.5 page, and this should be your margin when you start your practice. Okay, my advice is whenever you start with expanding a particular idea, you should use a particular book in which that idea was used. Okay, for Gramsci, you should mention Prison Notebook. Okay, then remember that all the important keywords should be used as well as underlined. Okay, and that is how you interlink with the whole concept. Okay, so I've told you how you are going to build introduction. You are going to check. So now what I'm saying is a conclusive word of this lecture. Okay, so conclusive word is, today you have learned that whenever you are going to attempt an introduction, you are going to do identify the directive of question. Directive is comment, explain, discuss, examine. What is this? Okay, gradually we are going to take example of different question directives, and you are going to clear that what way you need to mold your question. If question is mold your answer, if question is critically analyze, examine, everything you are going to do. But you are clear that you are going to look at question directive, then you are going to look at question keyword, and then these question keywords you are going to give hint in introduction itself, so that evaluator is clear that yes, you have understood the demand of question, you understood the context of question. Then you are going to go into the body part, and then conclusion should have element of whatever is already discussed there. So I hope this lecture brought some clarity in your concepts as well as how you should attempt PSIR optional answer, right? So I'm excited for this journey which we are going to have in next 9 following lectures. If you have any other query related to PSIR optional answer writing, then you can shoot me a message on Telegram. I'm added in the group which is made specifically for this workshop. Okay, chaliye. So keep learning, keep growing, and most important, take care of yourself, take care of family. All of you know what is happening around in second wave of Corona, right? So your family is your responsibility, your nation is your responsibility. So fulfill your responsibility, right? See you next time. Keep learning, keep growing. Shashank Tyagi signing off.